Well, first of all, congratulations and thank you for that beautiful overview of your research. I'm going to go and ask you a question that is really close to my heart, because one of the reasons that I was so excited about your research and so honored to be part of your committee was because I agree with your hypothesis that spirituality really needs to be integrated if we are going to succeed in bringing about a sustainable way of living. So I'm very curious, and again, this is kind of a egoistic question because maybe you'll help me to figure it out. What to do? Like, how are you going to bring about this amazing scholarly body of work into practice? How to translate it in ways that people will not only find it interesting or intriguing, but really a guideline or some help to really bring it into their living experience?
Thank you for that question. It's kind of fun and exciting just to even begin to think about that question. One of the first things that come to mind is that I happen to know just through personal conversations with people that a lot of people have spiritual experiences that they are reluctant to bring out in the open, to talk about. I feel like spirituality is kind of where sustainability was maybe 30 years ago, where sustainability a few decades ago was kind of at the periphery of the conference room table. People were starting to talk about it, but it wasn't brought right in the middle of the table in the boardroom meeting. And I feel like spirituality, some people use the word mindfulness, or, it depends on the language of the tradition, but it's starting to kind of percolate more around the edges. And I feel like now it needs to, quick like a bunny, come to the middle of the conference room table. And I think one way to do that is just to start talking about it. Just for people to start sharing their personal, in some cases very esoteric, spiritual experiences. So that's the first thing I think of. The second thing actually is dreams. Because even for people who are really married to a materialistic reductionist framework, most people have had some kind of big dream that they remember even years later. And the moment they start to talk about it, no matter how much they might claim to really just, subscribe to the material worldview, it opens something in people just to sit around a little table and for people to start discussing their dreams. This space lands and people are, they're open. They're in wonder and awe, just at their own psyche and the mystery of what happens. And really, I would say the third thing I'll mention just really quick is it is about personal experience. So for me, your question could equally be, how do we get people to have spiritual experiences? And the answer is we don't really. It is a personal transformative process as well as a collective transformative process. And it is about individual will, but also individuals accessing this much bigger, choice and access to this much more global sense of will and life and the mystery beyond what we sort of generally subscribe to in the daylight waking hours. So those are the first three things that come to mind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Does that feel complete for you, Kathia?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Dana, please. For your benefit.
Thank you.
For you.
Okay.
I want to commend you on your eloquence, use of technology, the whole way in which you have presented this and what you're doing.
Kathia, could you hear that okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great.
Oh, okay. My question for Felicia is, disconnection gives us the sense that the world has no limits. Respect for limits, appreciation for the need for restraint, and humility emanate from our ability to form connections. Disconnection is a break from oneness. It causes us to believe there is no end to how much we can progress. So imagining that resources are unlimited, it's not surprising that we avoid putting limits on ourselves and worship growth and a developed sense of more. But this path we now know is not sustainable. So let me ask you today, please tell us how we can develop and sustain a path of mindful spiritual engagement that is sustainable. One that admits to and nurtures our fracturedness rather than denying or trying to overcome or do away with it. The benefits of living a connected life clearly outweigh the costs. So speak a little bit, please, on how to celebrate our disconnection, our fracturedness, and our precious, fragile, limited, and elegant nature that is the character of all earthly beings.
Thank you, Dana. So recently I've become a little bit involved in local, I live in Marin County, and there's a coalition of people called the Marin Equity Coalition. And I've just done a little bit of volunteer work with that group. I went to a summit they had in November. I think it was, maybe it was September of last year. And the first thing that comes to mind when I hear your question is, I remember there was a speaker there who said, talk about racism every day. And she's a race relations, education expert, speaker type person, activist. And she was speaking to this point that the goal is not to become colorblind. The goal is to basically, she didn't exactly say this, but my interpretation of what she said was to become more present with who you are, with who you are, and with who you are. And that doesn't mean, I don't see color, I treat everybody equally, which is kind of a privileged stance, actually, and a not really true stance. So I think, while on the one hand, we're heading for, not discriminating against people in a negative way for their ethnicity or religion, or I'm thinking of Dr. Seuss and the star belly or whatever that story was, for something. We also want to preserve and promote and culture. So, it's like with the fractal, we need to keep and continue to grow the diversity. And so I'm thinking again of the Theory U people, and it's more about becoming conscious of the system and helping the system to become conscious of itself. And this underlying principle of life that life requires diversity, and the greater diversity, mysteriously, the greater unity. So, and then finally I would say that it does, again, come back to cultivation of our own consciousness, to nous, to this higher order of intelligence that requires surrender, that requires opening, and that is just so much more fun and interesting and multidimensional. I mean, I've had like this much training in vision from my perspective, and yet compared to most people I meet, I've had like this much training. And even so, it's like, I feel like I've had this little dose, and even so, it's like, even just that, it's like the world is much more fascinating. I'm not in that teenage place of pissed off, looking around at the world being like, hello, this is what I'm hearing? Like, really not happy. It's taken a lot of years, it's taken a lot of personal introspection, it's taken a lot of sincerity on my part and determination to put myself through the spiritual transformation mill. It's not easy. It's not about blissing out at the spa or the meditation/spa. It's really unpleasant, very uncomfortable, and calls the most out of you. But ultimately it is. It's personal. And so yeah, that's when you said in your question, speak a little on how to celebrate our disconnection, our fracturedness, and our precious, limited, fragile, and elegant nature. I think it has to do with that higher level of intelligence, much bigger, that requires surrender as opposed to this, you were talking at the beginning about the disconnection. That's very common, it's very addictive, and it's very thin. It is boring. And I think a lot of people are really tired of it, and it's at the breaking point at this point, which is good. It's also really stressful, the break. But I think I've seen it happening in the world around me. I've seen myself go through that process in certain periods of my life. Thank you.
I like your phrase, growing the diversity, and celebrating it. That was excellent, and thank you very much.
Thanks.
I'm going to hand you this too, although I may modify it just so you have something to look at.
Okay, great.
Say this. So like Dana, I want to also appreciate not only the excellent written dissertation, but really a splendid presentation, really beautiful. And I think one you could present any number of places to the great benefit of the audiences that get to hear you. I may, for the benefit of others, say that her dissertation was a little over 400 pages, and it became evident that it was going to have to come to a close. So she originally wanted to write about all 7 threads and threats, and needed to focus on 4, as she's indicated, and 3 others, which she did touch on, just couldn't be part of this particular work, and no doubt will be in others. So I thought that I might invite you to speak about one of the other ones, although I have to say, I have a sort of bias. I'd love to hear more about the awakening one. And you may or may not want to connect it more to nous that you've spoken about, and or vision. And I just for kind of illustrative purposes, the bullet points you see there were kind of versions, of what I'd like to hear about. But you could select any one of those, or even just speak around one of them rather than take it as a fixed question. It's just the spirit that I'm after. So I was curious about, how do you understand spiritual awakening in the 21st century as compared to how it's been traditionally understood? That's one thought. A second one is, how does your understanding or approach to an ecologically informed, activist-inflected spirituality help prevent a zealous stance that alienates others, despair, or burnout, which I think are things that have happened, and you discussed that in your dissertation. And lastly, as I already said, if you choose one of those or something like that, how does nous and vision, inform that way you understand, the way you understand spirituality, the kind of spirituality we need now that promotes sustainability. Any aspect of that?
Sure, thank you. Let's see, I'm kind of focusing on the middle one. How does your understanding or approach to an ecologically informed / activist inflected spirituality help prevent a zealous stance that alienates others, despair, or burnout? One of the things I noticed is that when I was looking, let's say, at Living Simply, and I would start out the Living Simply chapter and I'd say, okay, where does the urging people to live simply show up in sustainability? And then I'd look for it in ecological science, I'd look for it in activism, and I'd look for it in sustainable business. And what I noticed is that activism, and specifically depth psychology, it's almost as though people in this sphere have had to overcompensate for the lack of a spiritual sense in the other spheres. And, so I think when you mentioned, a zealous stance that alienates others, in particular, I think that I've experienced that myself, either being the person who's like, stop it, or seeing that reflected back to me in other people, like, maybe a presenter or someone even in a book who's also taking that stance of like, stop it. And I think it's because it's like, it all kind of gets squeezed into this, into the activism slot. And so if you're an ecological scientist, for example, Like I read this book called Beyond Words by Carl Safina, who's an ecologist and a conservationist, and has this beautiful and very sad, incredible book where he goes through the ecology from a scientific perspective and also from a cultural perspective of wolves and of elephants and of killer whales. And then also some other animals in there, but largely those three groups. And so on the one hand, he's a scientist, but on the other, the way he addresses these groups is very like person to person. And he speaks directly to the necessity of deconstructing the fact that it's okay to call an animal a that, as opposed to a who. And so I think as these boundaries start to be thoughtfully eroded, not forgotten and just kind of, neglected, but thoughtfully taken down, where an ecological scientist can start to speak from his heart genuinely and sincerely. And for hopefully other ecological scientists to not stick him on a shelf with the activists that they might have put on a shelf who are yelling and screaming, but rather to take him seriously. I think that's the kind of movement that's helpful right now. And I also ran across a few other ones where they take the risk of using emotive, heart-filled, and careful language to describe their scientific approach to whatever their subject or subjects are, but they're doing it in a whole person way. They're not doing it in this, sterile, materialistic reductionist, or as my partner Cornelius calls it, deluded abstractionist kind of, they're not taking that stance. They're opening up the box. And there's a number of others who I ran across who are actually scientists and who have had spiritual experiences or who have a spiritual and heart-based genuine care for the other that they're studying, that might be a plant, that might be a grove of trees, that might be fish, that might be insects, that might be killer whales. And in fact, in my dream last night, I was trying to make the point that I understood from reading Carl Safina's book, that killer whales are more sentient than we are. They're more sentient than we are. They have this massive head, this massive cranial envelope is what we would call it in my meditation school, that's so built to understand and feel subtlety. And our ability to understand and feel subtlety is like so small compared to theirs, especially like in the modern condition in the Western world and the Bay Area, whatever. But to perceive subtlety, it's so beyond our ability to even comprehend or conceive. Carl Safina jumps to mind, and I think I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, well, that was great. And for the audience, I want them to know that I'm glad you selected that question, because you actually discussed that in detail in the dissertation. I think it's one of its many strengths. So at this point, I'd like to open it up to anyone who'd like to make a comment or a question. We'll probably have you take maybe one or two of those, and then the committee will adjourn, and you continue to talk to others when we do that brief adjournment.
Great. Questions, anyone? Aaron's kind of raising his hand, I see.
Well, yeah, it's kind of self-interested question, but I guess maybe I'm sort of curious what you got out of the Abrahamic religions and all this.
So, Kathia, in case you didn't hear that, Aaron was asking about the Abrahamic religions and what I got out of the Abrahamic religions in the context of this dissertation.
Yeah, anything relative to this,
Yeah, the first point I'll make is that, again, it was a movement toward the mystical aspects of those traditions that was most fruitful in terms of finding people within those traditions saying, we need to live simply, and care and heart and love are of absolute importance, or very important importance, and the experience of oneness opened up. So it was looking at the more mystical aspects of Christianity and Islam and Judaism. Also, I was critical because of in certain places more so than I was maybe with the other traditions of these three, because they are the loudest, the most well known. Probably, I would say, statistically have a very large number of adherents, certainly in the cultural milieu in which I've grown up and lived my life. So even though I'm not a member of any one of them, I still felt in a way closest to those in certain ways because of the people I've known, or maybe grew up around, or the worldviews of the people whose books I've read or who have been my teachers. They might have grown up in those contexts. And so yeah, there's a lot of the black and white. There's a lot of the schisms. The opposite of Karen Hart being antisocial tendencies. There's a lot of examples that you can pull of people who have acted in what I call antisocial ways in the world, claiming, under the cloak of one of these traditions. So yeah, there's a lot more that I could say, but those are a few highlights.
I think this would be a good moment if you and everyone else could go to that
Sure.
deck for probably just 3 or 4 minutes, and then we'll invite you back in.
Okay, great.